We don't have much time for this next interview, which is a very important interview, but we'll try and get as much as we can out of it with both of my guests. Now, the International Trade Administration Commission has been tasked with reviewing South Africa's tariff structure for steel products to protect the embattled local industry. On the 19th of March, Itac published a notice in the Government Gazette informing stakeholders of its intention to initiate the process of reviewing the steel tariff structure. This would impact 355 tariff codes worth 32 billion rand in imports annually. However, steel industry experts are concerned that the Itac review might have far-reaching implications in the steel industry. So for more on the process, we are joined virtually by the International Trade Administration Commission Chief Commissioner Ayabonga Cawe and Donald MacKay, who is the CEO of XA Global Trade Advisors. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Thanks so much for being with us on this important issue. All right, Commissioner, I'm going to get quickly into it because I know we don't have too much time. There had been conversations lately about how South Africa should protect the steel sector. How would you describe the state of the steel industry going forward?
Thank you very much, Leanne, and thank you very much for inviting us. I think that the steel sector is in a crisis locally and internationally. I think it's self-evident. The characteristic features of that crisis relate to a situation where we have an installed capability to produce globally more steel than we can absorb in all of the uses that we put steel to, be it in making agricultural equipment, construction, automotive, and many other downstream applications. And that problem is also manifest in our domestic market, even right through to a sub-product level. And really what we have been faced with over the last decade or so is a combination of responses to unfair trade. We're a small open market economy, and certainly as measures are put up to protect other markets that tend to import a lot more than we do, there's a significant amount of product that would have been destined for those markets that is being diverted into South Africa. And that's why you would have seen numerous anti-dumping safeguard and other measures that have been put in place to deal with this global manifestation of structural overcapacity. This review we put out last week, Leanne, is in line with that. It's trying to now begin to say, how do we undertake a review? It's not the first one we've done. I've heard many people say it's the first review ever. In 2005, 20 years ago, Itac undertook a review much narrower just on Chapter 72. And that review led to a decision to reduce duties to duty-free, 0%. An about turn came about a decade later, and it seems we're at it again. But I think the conditions and the situation we are confronted with has fundamentally changed. And I think that this necessitates a response. And we are going out to quiz the public on specific questions as a provocation to say, what is the view of interested parties across the wide diversity of the South African public on some of the issues that we are raising in the notice that we put out last week.
All right, Mr. MacKay, now, why do you feel that the government's review of the entire steel chain could mean bankruptcy for scores of companies in the sector?
Yeah, well, firstly, let me just agree with the Chief Commissioner that there is way too much steel globally chasing far too little demand, and that is a problem. My concern with this particular review is not that the review be done, but it is an incredibly wide-reaching review, which in some ways it kind of has to be, so that you don't just pick certain chunks. But it goes everywhere from iron ore all the way down to kind of a padlock and everything in between. So it's an incredibly broad review covering a huge amount of product. And all of it has been done in a very short amount of time. Now, again, I'm not suggesting there's no urgency, but when you kind of put all of these factors together, my fear is that there will always be trade-offs, and some of those trade-offs will be that some companies will not be able to get through it. So if you inflate the cost of your raw material, then the downstream product becomes less competitive. If you inflate the cost of the whole value chain, you sell less of the product. So in all of this, again, Itac has a really, really tough job in front of them to try to work out how to deal with the sector that is very clearly extremely distressed. I mean, I think that we'd agree completely.
Yeah. So if we can, Commissioner, the Department of Trade, Industry and Commission has made the announcement that tariffs will be reviewed. This we know. But perhaps you can take us through your mandate and what you've actually been tasked with.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Leanne. I think the tariff review is but one part of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
The other part is to deal without getting into the domain of alarm and sensation with what Donald is raising. If indeed the shift towards, within whatever policy space you have, a higher tariff on any one specific steel product, we are fully aware there are many players downstream, including re-rollers, whose input requirements would require some of the steel whose tariffs you are likely to raise. Which is why in the notice, we also raise the issue of the possible creation of rebate provisions for targeted sets of products, informed, of course, by our capability and the input needs that are prevalent rather than imagined in our market. And so our mandate is, yes, review the tariffs in line with the policy space you have. 2, consider, in line with this, sensitivity to cost-raising effects, whether you need rebate provisions in line with whatever decision you make on MFN tariffs. And then I think the third one is quite important, which is if we read this as a chronic rather than a conjunctural crisis. As I said, we did this in 2005, it was done again in 2016, we're back here again in 2025. There's something about this that is not episodic.
Yeah.
And if it's a chronic challenge of structural overcapacity, we are also asking the public here, does that amount to an emergency situation as the multilateral trading system as contained in the GATT allows for in Article 19? Now, many people have said, including Donald, that this presents a step change and a departure from our multilateral commitment to the WTO. There's nothing that could be further from the truth. We're a founding member of the GATT. We're also a critical part in the Uruguay round. We have reaffirmed our commitment to multilateralism, even in our presidents of the G20. We are asking a different question. We are saying, within the existing playbook of multilateralism, does what we are seeing in steel constitute an emergency action that would necessitate a review even of the tariff ceilings that we have in place? Now, many people are saying we must not even ask that question, and I think that's fundamentally irresponsible. The last thing, Leanne, that we are also charged with is we've heard from the industry that there's massive amounts of customs fraud, misclassification, misinvoicing, and so on. And a big part of that is to also begin to think about what kind of import permitting or even surveillance and monitoring do you need on specific categories of imported product. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
We had in 2004 under 1 million tons of flat product imported. We saw a massive surge in the period prior to the 2010 World Cup and even immediately after that.
Yeah.
And I think we are in a position now where some of this is starting to raise environmental and safety concerns. And that's the other element that the review must consider.
Okay, so Donald, very quickly, I need to get your comments on all of this because there's a lot that's been said. But perhaps in your answer, you can also give us an idea of a panic has set in over the state of the domestic steel sector with the possible closure of ArcelorMittal South Africa's Newcastle and Vereeniging long steel plant. What do you think needs to be done?
I've absolutely no idea. I'm honestly don't. The problem is incredibly complex, and like I'd said earlier, Itac have their hands full to arrive at a reasonable outcome. My concern with all of this is, without getting into a technical debate, which Ayabonga and I can have offline, I think my primary concern with this is that there's a staggeringly large scope to this review. It's been done in a fairly short amount of time, which I understand because there is kind of a blur. The platform is on fire at the moment, so something has to be done urgently. But very large reviews done in very short amounts of time lend themselves to inadvertent mistakes. So I certainly don't think there's any bad intention, but I think the unintended consequences in such a review could be quite horrible. And of course, I would think Ayabonga would agree, we'd all want to avoid that sort of outcome.
Yeah, we certainly do. Gentlemen, I'm loath to leave it there, but I have to. I think we need to pick this conversation up. There is clearly a lot that needs to be discussed here. Donald MacKay is the CEO of XA Global Trade Advisors, and Ayabonga Cawe is the International Trade Administration Commission Chief Commissioner, speaking about government's review of steel duties.